Hi guys, my name is John. I think I'm better known here in Cambodia as the guy who drove around in a plastic car. And the idea that I'd like to share with you today is to dream big but follow through. So I love to drive. It's kind of my thing, and I founded my company, Nomadic Nation, based on this. We produce television shows about driving around the world, and we also use these shows to promote awareness and funds for street children. So at this point, I've driven around a couple of countries, continents, but this was my first big dream. It was called Trabant Trek. And I think that every big dream needs an inspiration and it needs a name. So I called mine Trabant Trek, and it was inspired by, there we go, Mitsumlan and TEDxPhnomPenh. And they taught me, there are two NGOs working here in Cambodia, and they taught me that anything was possible. And so with that in mind, I wanted to try something that most people said was impossible, and this was to drive 3 East German Trabants and taking 9 people and drive from Europe here to Cambodia. And a lot of people said this was crazy. The Trabant's rated as one of the 50 worst cars ever made. And so undoubtedly we were going to break down. There were going to be a lot of issues. But I want to tell you a little bit about the Trabant real quick. It has a 600cc 2-stroke engine. And it's so light that one person can pick it up. It wasn't light enough for us to bring it all the way up the stairs today, but it is sitting downstairs in case anybody saw it. Now, on top of having a really basic engine that only has 18 horsepower and goes with a top speed of about 80 kilometers an hour, it's super basic. So the gas tank, if you can see it, is right there. And there's no gas gauge. So if you want to measure the gas in the Trabant, you actually have to stick a ruler down inside of there and kind of figure out how much gas you have. Obviously, there's no air conditioning, but there's also no heat. And this was an issue for us because we were driving in temperatures that ranged from -20 to 50 degrees Celsius. But the most fascinating thing about the Trabant is it's made out of plastic. And it's not the same plastic as, say, a water bottle is made out of, but it's called Duroplast. And this is essentially a really fancy word for plastic reinforced with cotton fiber. So it isn't the most safe car on the entire road. But we did manage to drive it here. It took us, that's us trying to get up the stairs, sorry. That didn't work out so well for us. We got stuck about halfway up. But you can see, I mean, 20 people can lift the car. It only weighs about 600 kilos. But despite all this, we did make it 25,000 kilometers through 18 countries here to Cambodia. It took us about 3 months longer than we thought it would. So I mean, this thing was basically nothing more than an underpowered tuk-tuk, and I don't know if anybody saw the car downstairs. I mean, it's not very big, it's super uncomfortable, and I want you guys to try to imagine spending like a day driving around in that, and then try to imagine a week, and then maybe a month. It was my home for 6 months. Like, I literally lived in that car. So the next question is probably why I came up with this whole idea. The first thing is I love Trabants. I remember being in Berlin in 1989 and walking into East Berlin as the wall fell down. And the whole city was blackened by coal smoke, and the only source of color were these cars that kind of lined the streets. And I was 9, and they seemed like toy cars to me, and it was one of those memories that kind of stick with you forever. So when I moved from Cambodia to Budapest, there were a couple of them around the streets. I saw them periodically. And I remember being in my office building and looking out the window. And I remember it very vividly. It was a bleak Hungarian winter. Dark, terrible, awful. And all I could think about was, damn, I wish I was back in Cambodia. Warm, nice, everything else. And at that moment, as random as it might sound, a Trabant sputtered by below. And it just kind of clicked to me, like, drive back to Cambodia in a plastic car. So as crazy as that might sound, that was my dream. And making a dream a reality is a lot different than just simply having a dream, and I really wanted to make mine come true. The first thing I had to do was I had to get 3 Trabants, and they're not the easiest thing to find necessarily, but luckily I was in Hungary, and there's quite a few of them there. Now, that being said, the people who have them are anxious to get rid of them because they want real cars. Nobody wants these little plastic 2-stroke machines that break down constantly. And so they were pretty damn cheap. They were 60 euros a piece. So that's kind of how it all started. But the people that I bought them from, they laughed at me. They were like, why is this American buying these terrible cars? Like, what's he going to do with them? And then when I explained what I was going to do, they were shocked. And so between them and everybody else that I spoke to, their reaction was far from encouraging. They kind of just didn't believe that it was ever possible. They were telling me, like, you'll make it 100 kilometers, you'll break down. There's no way you'll make it there. You're going to have a donkey pull you all the way there. Like, it's just not going to happen. You know, you're going to have to find like little kids on the side of the road that'll push you the rest of the way. There's no way you'll make it. And I think this is where follow-through becomes more difficult, because it's so easy to listen to people's criticism and their negativity and just give up before you even start. I see it all the time. I see it happen all the time, and I imagine everybody else here does as well. But for me, it made sense to listen to these people because they knew more about the Trabant than I did. So I decided that I would listen, but I wouldn't let it derail my dream. And instead, I try to deconstruct their criticism and, you know, answer their questions, have them answer mine. And anytime I couldn't find the answer that they had for me, I'd go and I'd try to answer it. And one of the best examples of this was the simple kind of logistical question of where are you going to find spare parts for a car that hasn't been produced since 1991? Where are you going to find two-stroke motor oil along the way? So the answer to that was just to bring everything with us. And so we ended up with a fourth support vehicle, and we stuffed everything in there. We had an extra engine, we had 2 extra transmissions, any spare part you could imagine we probably had, plus 2 60-barrel liters of oil. And on a side note, this was a 1979 Mercedes station wagon, and that thing broke down more than the Trabants did. So this was kind of my planning stage, and I found it good to take their criticism and deconstruct it. I felt that it made my plan a lot better, and I felt that I was kind of prepared for anything once we got on the road. However, that wasn't necessarily the case. You kind of find that while plans are good, once you get on the road, anything can and will happen, and that nothing goes to plan. And it only takes one hiccup to disrupt everything. And for us, that hiccup on Trabant Trek was a ferry on the Caspian Sea between Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. And everything was fine. We got on the ferry, on schedule, everything was cool. And then we got stuck in the middle of the Caspian Sea waiting for a queue of VIP boats to dock before us. By the time we got off, we were 4 days late. And the problem with that is the fact that Turkmenistan is very specific about their visa policy, and we had a visa that was good for 6 very specific days. So when we got off the ferry, we had 2 days across the entire country. And this is a country that's ruled by a dictator who's rumored to have taken the gold out of people's teeth to make a statue to himself. So it wasn't exactly the best place to be breaking the law, but we did that. And we, first by overstaying our visa, and then the second thing we did was we drove around in dirty cars, which I guess is illegal because we got picked up by the police straight away. And we got held in a rundown hotel for almost a week. I mean, we were literally trapped in the country. We could do absolutely nothing. And after a couple of phone calls to various embassies and a few hefty fines for the dirty cars, we were finally let out. But, you know, now when I look back on this story specifically, everybody who was on this trip hates Turkmenistan as a result of this because it really just kind of killed the entire trip for us. But looking back on that, and then the fact that this visa issue was constant, that 4-day period killed us all the way along the way. The roads were terrible. We broke down 323 times. It's kind of hard to figure out why we didn't give up. But we followed through despite stuff like this happening in the middle of the Gobi Desert. And this is kind of what defines follow through for me, is the resolution that we could and we would make it. And I think that for us, the best method was creative improvisation. And Tony, our mechanic, was by far the most creative. He was kind of like Batman. It's like every time the Trabants would break down and we thought there'd be no way to fix it, he would break out his limited tool set that was almost like a gadget belt and fix it. And I remember there was this one time on the, is that gonna work? We were on the side of a mountain in Tajikistan, and he managed to fix this wheel bearing with nothing more than a Jenga piece. I don't think without him we would have made it anywhere. I mean, we probably would have made it out of Hungary. Then there was another time when we were in the Gobi Desert, and there's literally no roads in the Gobi Desert. This was the end of it. We got to the end of the road, and the rest of that is the Gobi Desert. Spans for 500 kilometers between Mongolia and China. And we broke down, and I mean, there's literally nothing around for hundreds of kilometers. It was -20. We had no food, no water, and It was the middle of the, I mean, it was bordering nighttime. We couldn't do anything to fix the car. And someone came up with the idea to burn the only thing available, which was camel dung. And so we all sat there around this stinking fire, knowing that without that, we probably would have frozen to death. For me, my greatest idea was to use the seatbelts from the Trabants as toe straps. We were constantly breaking toe straps. All the ones we had from Europe had already broken. And these things actually work better. We even managed to tow Tony in his car 300 kilometers over the Great Wall of China and into Beijing on nothing more than a seatbelt. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is that no matter how many problems we had, no matter how dire the circumstances, it was this determination to follow through from everybody on Trabant Trek that got us all the way there. And like I said, I mean, 323 times. It was epic. And what I learned was that no matter what, you have to follow through. You know, no matter what the criticism is, make it into something more constructive. No matter, you know, how many obstacles stand in your way, adapt your plan to the circumstances, but just keep that end goal in mind, because ultimately it's that end goal that's going to get you there. You just have to keep your eye on the prize. For us, the end goal was getting to Cambodia, and it was a phenomenal moment. I mean, after being on the road for 6 months and everything we'd overcome, we were finally in the last country. But as amazing as that was, it was really getting to Mitsamlan, who we were raising money for, that was the most memorable. We didn't know what to expect, and we arrived to every child out in the courtyard cheering us on. I mean, the sight nearly brought me to tears. They even made us little origami Trabants. I think they made Tony an origami hammer as well. But you know, ultimately, I'm hoping that they saw what we did as an inspiration to dream big and kind of overcome any adversity in their life, because it was Mitsamlan and the children there that taught me this, and I think one of the only reasons we managed to follow through. And since Trabant Trek, I've gone on to, despite everybody saying I was crazy again, we bought cars from a junkyard. Those are the kids. We bought cars from a junkyard, and I produced another show called Rec Trek, driving these junkyard cars across Africa. And next year I plan on driving cars on nothing but recycled vegetable oil from Los Angeles down to South America. But to sum up, I don't want to make this sound easy, because it's not. And follow through isn't always easy either, but I can tell you that it's worth it. I don't think that had I not driven plastic cars here that I would have done anything else. I don't think that any of these big dreams that I have would have happened. They would have seemed ultimately too crazy, and I probably would have given up. But this gave me faith that I could do it. Plus, I wouldn't have had the honor of speaking to all of you here today. Thank you very much.